Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of our sport techniques for custom residential and commercial floors. My name's Todd Schutte with the Bona e-learning team. I'm joined today by Phil Sanchez, who's our Senior Regional Sport Sales Manager, and Bob Mohr, who fixes your machines out at our machine service center, but also is our studio tech and helps us out a lot with prepping the floors here and doing things for our e-learning team. Being a second generation floor guy out of Florida, but now in Colorado for what, 3 years, 4 years?
This is going on 9.
Oh my gosh, 9 years. How time flies. Anyway, we're happy to see you guys back. We've got a lot to go over with the sport floors today. And I'll start off asking Phil, you were talking about, again, in the sport floor and just even how the finishes and systems have changed over the years, and a lot more recently, mainly because of VOC changes, but putting down oil-based sealer first and then water-based finishes, or vice versa, water-based sealers, oil-based finishes. So relate that a little bit to what we're doing here and some of the watch-outs that guys need to have.
Sure. I mean, yeah, with all these different looks and all the different requests and, like you said, VOC regulations and whatnot, there's always a lot of, oil first, water later, water, oil, a lot of mixtures. And really the key in that we see, number one is always going to be watch the environment. Make sure you're watching first off, is it super humid today? Is it really dry today? That's always going to play a pact either way. And I'll just elaborate on that a little bit. If it's super dry and you're waiting, your water base is going to harden a little bit more. It's going to get harder to get a bond. So you got to, keep an eye on that. If it's super humid and you're using oil, it's going to take a little bit longer to dry. So, you got to really pay attention to all those things during the steps during each process. And if it's going to require an abrade or if you're going to still be able to hot coat it with water or what the case is. So that's always important. Keeping in mind that same thing there, we always recommend an abrade with oil and water. So a lot of the times and a lot of what we've seen today and what we've seen over the course of the last couple of days is you're putting down water base, but you're going to coat it with oil base. Okay, we don't recommend a hot coat with oil, so we'd recommend putting a coat of DTS water base on top of that, then you abrade that, and then put your oil on so you get in the bond that you need. Because the last thing you want to do is spend all this time, bring this really beautiful floor to look, and then you got to take it down because it peels or something like that. So really paying attention to those key things is really important.
Yeah, and we'll talk more as we go through some of the floors and the panels and how we got to where we got, what customization did we do, what was our exact system, where did we abrade, where might we have hot coated if available. But I think a good thing to keep in mind is if in doubt, always abrade, even if it's just with the maroon pad by hand to give it some fresh abrasion, tack it, and then coat it, to be safe.
And that's kind of your insurance policy, absolutely. I mean, take the time. That's the thing that I would recommend to everybody. I know it gets tight, I know your windows get short, but try not to cut corners, take your time and do it the right way. That way you ensure that that floor is going to be good for the long run.
Yeah, well, and these type of floors may be even more critical, like with what you're saying, because it's going to take us a lot more time if I have to take it back down to raw wood than to redo this whole system and all the development that I'm doing. So bring the commandments back into play, right? And is it expectations? Is it keeping it clean? Is it reading the directions? And even reaching out to your Bona guy if you have questions about it, because everything that we're doing here, we've got experience in, which the guys out there may not. We can help with that, kind of help guide them through it.
Absolutely, and learn from our mistakes. I mean, that's one thing that I'd say that we've done over the years is we've had our mistakes and we've learned from them. So yeah, we've got a lot of those, and we're excited to help you with those. Yeah.
So Bob, that's good segue there. Appreciate that, Phil. Making mistakes, right? Where do you want to make a mistake? So you've seen this webinar. Now you go out and try to do a 5,000 square foot house, or what's your recommendation?
Yeah, we wouldn't recommend doing that. I mean, it's like Phil said. I mean, we've had a lot of trial and errors. We've learned a lot of things through this. So, I definitely would recommend getting some test panels. Maybe have some small little panels like kind of we're seeing here, and try it out. On your job and see. Definitely don't want to jump into that big 5,000 square foot job and have to redo it for a mistake that may happen. So try these things out on smaller panels, get comfortable with the feel of it, and kind of learn some of the tips and tricks, from yourself while you're doing it.
Yeah, it's probably similar to when guys come to our school and learn how to roll, right? So they've been T-barring forever. Now they learned how to use a roller. We still wouldn't recommend that they go home and now you're going to just roll every job automatically. They probably first try it in the bedroom, maybe a bedroom out into the hallway, something small, maybe just at their own house. So Point is, practice first, where you're not worried about getting paid for it, before you get commissioned for a job and doing some of this customization. Now everything's on the line, including your livelihood, so you better have a little practice and be a little better prepared for pulling off something for success, rather than risking that this job's going to go south.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think too, there's a lot of things that we're going to do that will just open up a lot of different things and different jobs that are going to come around. So.
And I'd like to add to that too, because I think that's the great thing that we do at Bona, and you know, Schutte's wearing it on his shirt right there, is training. You know, we offer a lot of trainings on site, on floors, with schools. You know, so if you are really interested in this, and you might not have the facility or what to use for your own as samples, we can help with that. So reach out to your local rep, and we'll be glad to help find something for you.
Yeah, and the other thing, like we mentioned in part 1 of this webinar, is get to know your local sport contractor. Most of the stuff that I've learned on sport floors has been from the team down at Prater's in Chattanooga. Again, they're probably one of the best sport floor guys that I know. I know some other sport floor guys out there. They're very specialized, right, in what they do. And those guys can probably give you some tips and tricks when you're trying some of this stuff out in residential and commercial, just to help you pull off some success. And thinking outside of the box, and again, customizing, right? How can you upsell? How can you do something really special in a residential setting or a commercial setting? The other thing you might keep in mind is, again, relationships, and have a relationship with your local professional artist guild. Or if you've got a custom snowboard or ski shop or skateboard or snowboards in town, guys who are good at spray painting, kind of street art if you want to call it that, those are the type of artists who can come in and really help with, take a stencil, and instead of it just being straight paint, can help you do fades and, blending things and custom designs, do, a little, some clouds and stuff on there. But if you have a relationship with those guys, the artists who can come in and do that, then you can really create some customized stuff. So we actually here at Bona, one of our graphic artists, Mohr Scarborough, great artist, really good graphic designer, and I had seen some of the stuff he had created for himself. He did a few small pieces actually for me. So we asked him to come in. We told him about this webinar and said, hey, could you come in and design something on a floor for us? So we're going to cut here real quick to a tape showing he came in, and just with spray paint in a little over 3 hours, he created this really awesome intergalactic design on a 4x8 piece of white oak flooring. So let's first go see what Mohr designed and created for us, and then we'll come right back.
We're going to be doing a spacing on this 8-foot by 4-foot floor panel here. My name is Mohr. I'm a senior designer here at Bona, and I've been here for about 5 years. Today we're going to show some possibilities of what you can do on a sport floor, and if you look for outside talent to help you out. We're going to be using a lot of spray paint and just getting a little crazy with it. I'm just trying to get the overall layout of where I want the planets to be. That's what these are kind of representing. It's just a quick way for me to get perfect spheres or circles for this. This is more considered street art. A lot of people, I've been obsessed with this type of art since I was a kid. I would always watch people for as long as I could while they were doing it. Now that we got the back layer filled in, so no hardwood's gonna be showing through, I'm just gonna start grabbing a few color combinations and start laying down the base work for the planets. I don't have like a mock-up that I am trying to match exactly, which my other pieces I definitely do that with, but something like this, something this large, and something this just kind of with spray paint, you can just kind of go with the flow and just make things up as you go. For this one, I just want to make something a little bit out of the ordinary. It's something that maybe most people don't think of when they think of art that would be on a floor or on a gym, just something that would still look really cool in that space, but that most people wouldn't really think to do. Now we're going to take some black, and we're basically just going to cover this, we're gonna fill it. Gonna clean up all the edges of all these. It's not gonna be messy. We're just gonna fill in all the blank space. Fill this thing up and spray a bunch of paint. Now we're gonna start adding some colors, really start adding some clouds, start adding some blues, some pinks, maybe some purples, and really start giving it some more depth and some other elements going on in here to kind of blend everything together, keep your eye moving, and really make it a lot more visually appealing. Pretty excited with how it is right now and the amount of time that we've put in. Now we're just gonna add some details. We're gonna add some different elements throughout here just to give it a little bit extra flair and really make things pop more than they already are. So. Now that we're at this point, the artist is done. Now the contractor can go over, put down the finish, cover it with any of your favorite Bona products, of course. And now you'd have something a lot more unique than you usually do. I think for contractors to reach out to local artists is a win for everyone. I mean, artists want to make work. Contractors, want to offer different solutions, more unique elements than they maybe normally could with some blue tape and a roller. I mean, we were able to do something like this in, really in a few hours. And, when it comes down to it, I'm not a professional artist. I work in marketing. If you get someone who does this full time, I mean, the results that you can get could be outstanding. And I mean, you can build the price of the cost of the artist into the quote for the client too. So it's not coming out of your pocket and you're not making less money on the job. So I think that reaching out can really get you something different than what you're used to and what most people are used to, and really something just a step above.
All right, so let's talk about this section a little bit. And this is a real simple design that you can really recreate on most any floor, just a checkerboard pattern. What we did is we marked off 2-foot centers on all sides, and then we ran 2-inch tape parallel to each other so that my center lines on those 2-foot centers are right in the middle of that tape. And then what you can do is go through with your X-Acto knife and cut away the opposite tape for your side. And it can be a little hard to line up if you get that tape really good and close together. But then you can just peel that away and it should give you a nice clean design for the box that you want to do. And again, it takes a little bit of thinking sometimes as you're going to make sure you're making the right cuts in the right places. But a nice simple little design. Let me cut this one away. And you also want to think about, so you could do this design with stain, with paint, with glaze. We're going to do it as a combination here with paint. So we already got our blue paint down. And then with a 1:16 blue glaze of the same paint. But we could have done it all glaze. We could have done it all paint. We could actually do stain on this floor as well. You can do a combination of them. But maybe think about what layers you want to put down first. So I wanted to put the paint down first because I know it's going to be thicker than my glaze. And I'm not worried about the glaze running underneath and getting into or discoloring the stain. I'm still going to take some blue tape and on my corners here, just tape those off just as a little extra precaution. Not so much again that I'm worried about it running underneath, but I'm more worried about if I pull anything up and over the top. And you do want to go through and still make your thumbnail marks anywhere where that tape comes together. Otherwise I will have a bleed under there. The other thing, if you're going to get into a lot of blue tape designs, I would also just invest again in one of these sport rollers, because there is a little bit of magic to whatever the compound this rubber is made out of. But you can roll all your lines then, and you really lean down and put some pressure on it. But usually once over is all you need. You might do it a couple times. And I already rolled the outside. So we're going to be putting glaze here and then in a couple of the smaller ones on the outside. And I'm going to use a couple different applicators. You know, when Phil did his demonstration earlier, we just used 2 T-bars and one keeping it really dry. Well, that was on raw wood. This floor is already sealed. So we could do the T-bar method again, and we could put plastic on 2 sides here and pull back and forth across the plastic. But I'm just going to use my 2-inch tape as my little place to pull up. And so I'm going to be using my cut-in pad, and I'll probably pull stuff straight across, but then when I get to the edge here, I'm going to pull it up so that I can stop on my blue tape, and that'll let me feather that into and off of the board there. Okay? We're also going to try, you know, if we get into some of these smaller areas, I could also use a foam brush. I wouldn't want to use it on something this big, or a regular paintbrush too. So we'll use, at least in the small corner there, we'll use one or both of these, and I'll try one of them on the sides here too. So again, the glaze we made up is Intent Seal, 16:1 with the blue paint. So we had 24 ounces of Intent Seal, so I put in 1.5 ounces of the blue paint. It's been sitting for just a little bit, so I do want to go back and mix it up again just to make sure nothing started settling out of there. And again, this floor is already pre-sealed with 2 coats of Intent Seal. Always have a place where you can go back and set your products. And again, instead of like Phil did and pulling it dry, we're going to treat it almost more like a thin sealer coat. So I just want to get kind of everything spread out here fairly evenly. And then I'm going to go back and feather everything in. Again, just fingertip pressure, just kind of guiding the applicator across and settling on the far side there. Now, also like Phil did the other day, you may want to have an extra rag handy if you think you get too much product in there. You got to get a little off of it. You can do that. If I got a little too generous with my pour. And this way we can go back and put down, you know, another coat if we need to, especially if this first one ends up a little streaky. We could do that, but I like treating it more like a thin coat of sealer because I also think it gives it a little more of a chance to flow out than versus if we were trying to pull it dry. All right? So that's how we do the big square. Now we'll move over to this side.
And we'll try the brush over here. Careful flipping drips. So again, this is probably an area a little too big even to be using this, but you'll see if I just spread it out, treat it like a thin coat of sealer, then I can even just dip some more if I need some more. Don't have to pour puddles out onto the floor. Can dab it off and then just go back and do your feathers. Again, here I'm making sure that I'm going in line with the wood. You know, the same way that the wood's running. That way, if I am leaving any slight streaks in the floor, they should be nice and camouflaged with the grain of the wood versus going against it. Now here, the space is so small, and again, make sure you do your little fingernail marks wherever it might be needed. And I need some tape there. And actually here, let's try the foam brush, see how that works out. The only thing I don't like foam brushes, they don't seem to really hold material. It just kind of sticks to the outside, so just like that, you tend to get some drips. I like the way the foam brush would, or the regular brush would probably work on this. But we'll see, the foam brush may give me a little nicer, smoother feather too. The other thing you got to be careful of, I think, with foam brushes is because the sides are relatively hard compared to the brush, I think the edges of the brush tend to blend in a lot better. You got to make sure you don't leave a hard side with the edge of your foam brush. We'll go ahead and use that down here on a little bigger area. Go ahead and tape these off. And again, while I'm doing this, you know, again, you've got an unlimited number of things you could do with each of these squares, right? I could then come back, re-tape on top of this, do stain. Actually, if I was gonna do stain, I would start out with a whole stained floor, then put sealer on top of that, smooth it out, and then put the tape on top of the sealer. So here we just started out with the natural floor, put intent seal down, because I really wanted to kind of maximize that contrast between the checkerboard pattern and the natural color of the floor. You'll also notice that versus what Phil did on the raw floor, one, we've got probably a little thinner solution of glaze here. But if you really want more color out of your glaze, it's best to do it on raw wood. When you do it on top of the sealer, it's kind of like putting stain on the floor. You know, the stain will really soak into that raw wood, and the pigment tends to stay down in the grain. So you tend to get more color out of your glaze putting it on raw wood than you are going to get putting it on something pre-sealed. So we'll see how these look when they dry. Again, I got a couple spots that opened up there. So that's something we can easily fix when we come back. I got a couple here too. So when this dries, we come back, we'll hit it with a maroon pad, put on another coat, should cover everything, even everything out, and then we'll be good to go. All right, so that's doing a checkerboard pattern with a solid blue paint and 1:16 blue glaze, and we'll come back and finish this up a little later. Hey guys, so here we are. We've got our paint down with our stencils. A couple things I want to revisit real quick is before you start painting. There's a couple tips that I'd like to just kind of put out there. Paint bleed can be a concern. One option you can do is once you get your stencil down, you can actually do a little bit of a sealer around the edges as well, so that'll kind of fill whatever voids there might be between the stencils. That helps prevent that bleed. Also with some colors, you know, some of your lighter colors, your yellow, your oranges, like we used here, depending on what's underneath it, you might need a couple coats to cover. I mean, I'm talking 3-4 coats at times. So there's a couple tips you can also do. You can use a beige paint or you can use a light gray paint and use it as kind of like a primer. That'll help minimize the number of paint coats that you're gonna need to do. So here we are here, we've got different coats down. Before you pull tape or pull your stencils, it's typically you want to wait till at least it's dry to the touch. In most cases, we like to pull the stencils by the end of the day, so you don't want to keep them for a couple days typically, just because we've seen there could be some transfer of residue on some of the stencils that are used out there. So it's better just to let it dry to touch and then pull it. With our paints, you can do multiple coats in one day, multiple colors one day, so you can get a lot done in that 1 day period. So here we're going to start pulling the tape. There's no prep that needs to be done once it's dry. You really just start pulling this off, and if you've got some tough edges, you know, razor blades are good to use to help pick it up, but really you just start pulling, and to me this is the best part. This is the most rewarding, fun, therapeutic part of this whole process. Looks like we've got some really clean, great lines here, which is awesome. So where that razor blade is going to come in handy. And there we go. I mean, very, very clean on this, which is fantastic. We do have one little spot here where we did have a little bit of a paint bleed. And so what you can do, just get a little X-Acto knife, get a regular box cutter, razor blade, or even if you have a scraper, which most of you do, and just kind of scrape those little edges off. Nice and clean. So now what's the next step? So now you want to cover this and coat it. A lot of times, if you're going to oil base, I mean, every time when you're going to oil base, we recommend an abrade. So that can be done with a maroon pad. You can use a maroon pad underneath your buffer with, if you want a little bit more, you know, 180, 240 grit type of diamonds underneath, and just give it a light abrade. You don't want to burnish it, you don't want to get too aggressive with it, but you just want to get a little bit of bite so that your finish has something to bond to. The other thing to keep in mind is if you do have 5 or 6 colors, or you know, maybe 3-4 colors, whites against reds or blues, you know, you got to be cautious about ghosting. And what I mean by that is if you get your dust particles from your blue onto your white, you got to make sure those come off. One tip or trick that we use to help prevent that when you need an abrade is to do another coat of intense seal over the paint itself. So when you're going back to abrading it, you're abrading that clear coat, you're not abrading the paint itself. So that's a nice little trick, so you can just completely avoid that. Once you've abraded it, you definitely want to use a wet tack on it. If you're going oil-based, you can use mineral spirits, but typically it's just a water tack just to remove. Vac and tack is really a recommendation, so vacuum and then tack it off, let it dry, and then put your coat of finish on top. If you are using water-based though, that's the other advantage of using water-based, is you can go right on top of that within about 48 to 72 hours, depending on the humidity. If you're way past that period, it gets a little too hard and you don't get a really good bond, so you would need to do an abrade at that point. But now we're here, we're definitely gonna abrade it, and then we're gonna coat it, and we're all gonna be all set.
All right, so now we're going to take a look at our 2-part stencil, one of our 2-part stencils. And, you know, so we got the first part laid down. Now, when it was sent to us, it was laid out as just a 2-color. So this would have all been 1 color. Next stencil would have been another separate color, but we wanted to jazz it up a little bit. So because we had some pretty narrow margins around here, we were concerned about getting out of lines with some of our colors. So we just took some blue tape, made a little safe area all the way around where we needed to, especially on this gold and then around on the white, just so we wouldn't go out of the lines, or again, it gave us a little more margin of error for not getting paint over into the other areas. Even with that though, we did get a little paint out in here. Now this already has 2 coats of sealer on it. So if you get to it right away, you might be able to wipe it up wet. But you can always go back, take your scraper, just scrape that color out of the floor. And I'm just using, again, real light fingertip pressure, right? A real sharp scraper, and then even maybe holding it up on edge a little bit just to really maintain good control over that. You get that done, then you can even take 240 diamonds or whatever you'd like, go back just to make sure I don't have any scraper marks left in the floor, just to smooth all that out. And we can take that away and then we're good. But that is one thing you want to check whenever you're doing any paint or tape and everything else. Did I get any drips? Did I accidentally go over into another area? Take care of them as you see them.
Yeah, you want to make sure you cover these registration marks because it's going to help you line you up for your next stencil that you're going to do. We have multiple colors here, so we were kind of keeping inside the areas where we're going to be working. But if this was all one color, you could paint all over this whole area and not have to worry about it. You can go a lot quicker, basically. So good idea is to tape these off on your first stencil.
One other thing I'll mention with tape and stencils and everything else is, again, you can see some of the spots where we have, again, some bigger bubbles, wrinkles. Again, we're only concerned about anything that's along our open margins here, right on our edges. Another thing you can do if you have a real problem bubble or a wrinkle or something that you just can't get moved out or getting flattened, you can always take, again, an X-Acto knife and just pop it so you can squeeze more of the air out of it, probably more with your squeegee. Okay, so it helps me get that a little bit flatter, but if that was right next to where I'm gonna paint, I did just poke a hole in it. Even though it's a little tiny hole, I may still be concerned about it. So again, it's just playing it safe. Anytime where you think you might have poked a hole in an area, especially when it's right next to where you're painting, make blue tape be your friend. Just put some blue tape over it and that'll set you up. All right. So we're going to pull this stencil now and put the second one on. And we can expose our registration marks. The other thing that I had to go do is you need to cut through the registration marks on your second stencil. So again, a lot of us, all have nice utility knives. You want a sharp blade. You may be able to do it with this. But if you're going to get into this kind of artistic work too, I'd recommend investing in an X-Acto knife kit. Just because the precision you can get with these is a lot better than typically you're going to be able to get with just a utility knife. So a good set of X-Acto knives, and obviously having good sharp blades doesn't help to have dull blades or no blades with your knives. And then we also, as we're peeling this up, we also use some different tools. So here we use the roller, the little 2-inch roller to cover these two parts. But then we switch to a brush around the edges here, just so we could really control our application rate, where we were applying it. It really helped smooth everything out a lot quicker. And it's also key for us to make sure we pull all of the stencil up. So a lot of it's covered with paint right now. We don't want to leave any of those pieces down because they're probably revealing an area that we want, or covering up an area that we want paint to go next. So this is actually where, as Phil showed, where an X-Acto knife or a utility knife can come in handy to kind of get your edge started. It also helps a lot to pull, you know, either straight up at a 90-degree angle. Sometimes you want to pull in. You'll get a feel for it. I always like the paint to be nice and dry before I pull. Sometimes you know, are in a bit of a time crunch and might have to pull it while it's still a little wet. But you want to watch when you get to corners and stuff like that. You'll see right there I pulled the paint up. So anytime you get to a corner or a real fine area, you don't want to be jerking this up off the floor because you could pull the paint up. Now there's a couple things I can do there. One, I could take some super glue or even some sealer, go over that area real quick to glue it to the floor. I may wait and see if and how that's exposed when we put the second stencil on. But we got a lot of little tiny pieces in here. And you'll see that we did go over, again, one area here. I'm not going to touch that now. I want to wait and see, again, how that second stencil comes in and what's exposed or not. If I just go, you know, touching everything right now, I feel like I might cause more work than needs to be done. So we'll hold off and kind of see where that's at once the second stencil goes on.
Be really careful around these small areas.
Sometimes if you've got a particular color that seems to be tearing or coming off real difficult, or you're taking some pieces off, again, you can always take your X-Acto knife or your utility knife, kind of score along that line a little bit, and it may make it a little cleaner to take that off. But again, a lot of this stuff is going to be covered up with our next stencil. So even if we've got a few issues on some corners and stuff here, I'm not super concerned about that at the moment. And just because, you know, like in the foot area here, the skin area, just because we've got a section that we could paint doesn't mean that we need to paint it. We could just leave it natural and let that wood shine through underneath. So now we've got all of the first layer removed. Now we want to kind of line this up. You know, we got one over there, huh?
Yeah, I pulled it on accident.
So you want to line these up as precisely as possible. How's that looking?
Even though I pulled the one there, three are.
Yeah, that's why we put multiple registration marks on, so in case something happens to one, you're still okay. So when we're forming our hinge, right, again, I want to come straight across, flatten this out as I go, and then make sure, kind of as you tighten this back up, that everything's really lined up nice still. Then we'll put one more piece on there, just to kind of reinforce this. And sometimes, you know, if you have somebody on the other end who's not experienced, they'll try to start laying this thing down before you're getting to it. But that guy's job is to just hold this up and let the person on this side press it down, just so we're trying to make sure everything's lining up nice. I'm not getting any wrinkles in it. I'm trying to pay attention to the design area. And we're good to go there. So you can also see how you can see through this now, and the little bleed areas that they gave us. So the overlaps that then allow us to put, you know, another color of paint on, so that we'll have a seamless area between two colors of paint, or whatever color we decide to put over the top. We'll also talk a little bit about that when we get this pulled up. But for right now, we're going to go ahead, smooth everything out, pull the second layer off, and we'll be ready to put down that either that next color of single paint, or we'll see, we might divide this up too and put some different colors down there as well. As you guys could see when we were taking off the top mask, we had a couple little things happen. One, the second mask tore right here. We pulled this piece off. So we quickly laid it back down, squeegeed it out, and then we're a little more careful in how we were pulling it to make sure that didn't come back off. The area that I had a problem pulling the stencil off, the paint here. So what I'm probably gonna do is just trim this back, right? Trim this loose paint back along my stencil edge here, because I don't need, there's other paint that's going to go over that, so that doesn't matter, and that should be taken care of. And then hopefully I don't have an issue with the paint that's under that stencil now, but if it pulls up, again, we'll use some blue tape, form a little area around that, and we can touch that up with some blue paint in the end. This area is a little bit more of a concern, so the stencil actually started pulling the tape up right here. So what we can do is just take off this whole kind of bad area. And then we will simply use some more blue tape. Then I can make my own stencil. So what we'll do is we'll take the edge of this, kind of take it out into the floor where it was going, and follow down on this side. And it may have had a little bit of a turn in it too, but we'll just go straight, trim that off, kind of see how that looks. Yeah. So there we repaired our stencil back to hopefully pretty much like it was. We got rid of any loose paint or anything under here. Again, we'll have to touch up some of the blue when we pull that out. But right now I'm just more concerned about getting the next layers of paint put down for the second stencil. Then we'll always go back and we can touch up the blue around the edges as we need to. So just a couple areas, but again, this is the kind of stuff that's going to happen out on the job site, and it's a place where, again, good X-Acto knife, utility knife, and some blue tape could come in and help you out. The other thing we may want to do, depending on how we're going to paint this, because the stencil tore right here, that is going to be a potential open area, right? It looks like it's pretty well sealed up. But just to be safe, again, I can put a piece of blue tape over that. The orange core stuff is nice because it's pretty translucent, so I can really see down through it. You can always put a fingernail and stuff to it as well, but then I can just take my X-Acto knife, I can trim right along the outline of the stencil underneath. Then I can pull this extra up, and then that area should be good to go as far as not getting any paint underneath there and having a little dirty streak go through my white. One other thing to keep in mind that we'll probably do a little bit on this floor is when I've got bleed lines like this, sometimes that can cause a problem, either stuff showing through too much, these little shoulders, because now when we put another layer of paint on top, I've got this white sitting down here, I've got my other color going here, but then it's going to fall off that shoulder and it's going to be kind of down flat here. So I've got this little ridge. Sometimes that white can show through in that little shoulder area, just that little thin crease. So we may take a little bit of 120 grit paper, maybe 180, and just sand the edges, the shoulders of those white edges down a little bit, just so everything's a little bit smoother and more like a gentle slope than a hard shouldered, because the paint is fairly thick compared to everything else, so that'll help us get rid of that. All right, so we're going to go ahead and do those touch-ups, get this painted, and then we'll do a reveal. And now we're back to our little Art Deco stain job here. Again, the inspiration that I got from Jared Paris with Anchored Flooring out in California. And he did a lot more intricate than this. I think every board or boards that were tied in were stained in that floor. But we're just going to use 3 or 4 colors here. As we did the first time around, we got some ebony down, we've got some white down now, and then I pulled all the tape, and now it's going back and kind of looking at, okay, well, what do we got, and then where do I want some brown tones? And we pulled some just natural, which is really not going to give us any color, it'll just highlight the white oak a little more, or some nutmeg, which is our lightest brown tone. And then we'll have also a number of areas that are just going to stay natural. So one thing I'm looking at here also is when I pulled the tape up, do I got any problem areas that I need to address before we continue? I don't know if there'll be a problem, but I do got some little white speckles here, so some white drips from the stain when I was putting the white on. So if I just take my scraper, hopefully I can just lightly take those off. Right, and then I'm going back with my 120 grit because that's what this was finished with. Just making sure I'm smoothing anything out from my scraper and then taking care of that. Also over here off this blackboard, I've got some bleeds coming off this end. So I'm probably not going to touch those yet because again, what I may do is then that may help me decide, okay, well, this board I'm going to stain with one of my brown tones. Hopefully that'll redissolve in there a little bit, or just by adding some color to this board, now it will disguise any of the bleeds that I have right there. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go back and, so I think I want some brown tone coming down here. And this is, again, just about being creative and doing stuff outside the box. And yeah, this is going to take a long time to do, to tape this all out, to have these different sections in here. But again, with the right customers, it's absolutely going to hit their wow button and be something that really sets them apart from Mr. and Mrs. Jones next door or down the street, and be something that they really want to showcase in their house. Whether it's in an office, probably not the whole house, but who knows, right? Some stuff and some people like to go to that length. But just in an office, in a kid's playroom, in the master bedroom, somewhere this might be a perfect fit for one of your customers. So even when you're just doing stain, think about how you can be creative with that. And whether it's doing custom stain colors, like I don't know if we showed this one, but this is just natural, DriFast natural stain. and Court Lines Orange. So our Court Lines is our solvent-based paint, game line paint, but I mixed that about 25% paint, 75% natural stain, and I got an orange stain now. So again, your color palette there with your stains, if I wanted to work some of that orange into this floor as well, I could do that. I could make a blue stain, I could make a green stain, I can make any color stains that I want by using DriFast Natural Stain and then our blend or our mix of Court Line paint colors. So think outside the box. Don't think of it as just stain. Think of it as another way that you can be super creative, give your customers something that only they have. All right?
Hey guys, so we're back, me and Bobby. Little shake and bake action going on here. So we're gonna go through this stencil now and just hit a couple tips before you actually pull the stencil to look out for. As you're painting and you have designs that have curves or whatnot, or real thin lines, it is good to use a brush and to follow the pattern of that design. You don't want to just roll it on at one direction. I mean, it is best to get the most cleanest, smoothest look as if you use a brush, back brush if you need to, but just make sure you're nice and smooth going with that design. It's also a good opportunity before you pull it to look and see, are there any missing spots, any low spots, any thin spots? Now's a good time to kind of touch that up now that you still have that stencil down before you actually start pulling it up. Because once you pull it up, you got to go back and it's a little bit harder or more challenging. So save yourself the time and just kind of look at it first before you pull it, and then you get to it.
Yeah, I think one thing too, like you were just talking about, is that you want to make sure you kind of go slow on some of these corners, especially like if the stencil's been down for a period of time. Might be possibly pulling some of that paint, so kind of keep that in mind when we start pulling it back.
And again, like I said, and if you see that, get your X-Acto knife out, pre-cut that, score that, so that it does pull pretty easy. So we're going to get to it. Yeah, so one thing too, you got to be cautious when you do put a number of coats of paint on this too, that paint's going to get a lot thicker. And so as it pulls, it's going to be a little bit harder to pull, and just again be cautious that you're not ripping or stretching that tape where it's down here along the line. And if it starts to tear, one thing I like to do is kind of move your direction that you're pulling it, so that you keep that leverage and that tension with that stencil so it doesn't just tear off all the time. So that's a nice little trick to help out there as well. So as you're looking at this, we've got a darker stain underneath, and one of the tricks I could have saved us a little bit of time, or just made this a little easier here, is to use a beige or a light gray as the first coat underneath this yellow. That way you don't have to do as many coats to cover. That'll help kind of make it easier in this process, a little easier as well. So you see we've got one little piece here that kind of came up. So we're just going to score it real quick. Clean that up. There we go, pretty clean. This is a great example of bringing different worlds together as far as the products go. Obviously we've got a base color here, we stained a different color here, and then we did the paint on here. You know, you can also do a glaze. This doesn't necessarily have to be a stain. This could have been a glaze. This could have been a glaze. You know, that's what's really neat about this whole system of products, is that you can get very creative and very unique designs with multiple elements into this design, into this piece here.
One area I noticed when I was pulling this is that there's a slight area that the point kind of went away. So again, like kind of Todd was doing earlier, just take your orange core tape and just kind of follow the contour line here. And I can bring this back to a point and touch this up. And we're good to go.
All right, so here we're back. It's our second stencil with this design, and kind of want to go a couple pointers here as well. As you can see here, we had a bunch of different colors that we used on this, and they're smaller. So it's good to have a couple different size brushes with you. Helps really make sure that it's nice and clean and that you're only getting the paint where you want it. So that'll save you time down the road as well. With this, also this stencil, really it's two stencils, and so what that gives you is a lot of opportunity to kind of get creative too. It's just, you really use this as a template if you want to get a little bit more creative, get a little more detail. You can use an airbrush here if you need to. You can add some different features here, or do what we did here, just add multiple colors. So that's what's really neat about this, is you had a lot of different options and really unlimited ideas that you can bring out depending on what your customer is looking for. So with that, you know, we're going to go through now. We're going to kind of peel it off again and see how it looks.
You really want to be careful around some of these really tight areas here. I've already kind of pulled some of this tape here, but we can come back and retape that and paint that when we need to. But you really do want to kind of go slow around all these intricate areas here.
And again, when you get so many colors like this too, you're bound to have a couple areas that you might need to touch up and scrape off. And I mean, if you're anything like me, I mean, I tend to spend a little bit of too much time on stuff like that, but you want it to look good. So it's worth the time once you get to the end result. And this, what we're kind of seeing here too, I mean, this is always something to keep in mind, is if you let your stencil sit for an extended period of time, you get a really strong, that paint really forms its true film formation, and so it can be challenging to get a nice clean pull with some of this tape. So if possible, I do like to say, you know, within the same day, pull your stencils if possible, but we know that is not always the case, but just keep an eye out for that.
So we got like a few touch-up areas, but I mean, I think that the time savings that, you know, to do something intricate like this probably would have taken a lot more time than it would be for us just to touch this up.
Right. Yeah, and just again, be sure that you get all that little plastic off, all that stencil off. Make sure you go through it and just make sure you're not missing anything, just like that piece right there. There you go.
All right, so we're closing out part 2 here. Yeah, I just want to thank Phil and Bobby for being here and helping out again, because it obviously takes more than one person when you're doing stuff like this. So just we can go back over some of the things that we talked about and showed and learned today, but just taking blue tape and making a simple checkerboard pattern in a room, and then using, again, some of the different elements we've talked about. So in that one we used, you know, solid blue paint and then a lighter blue glaze with that to help create that pattern.
I mean, just going back and, you know, kind of recapping what we're doing here and what we're seeing here is just so many different options, and I think that's really what one of the takeaways is be, you know, don't be afraid to kind of get outside the box and get creative. Just make sure you're following the instructions, making sure if you've used a product before or not, you know, make sure you understand what you need to do before you go over with different coats. So just have a better understanding of what you need to do with each product, and you'll have a great end result. And just take your time. I mean, always look for conditions, watch the conditions, humidity, temperature. All those things are really key, especially when you start layering different products together. You know, it's always one thing to pay attention to.
And how about that big key, Phil, on how do we prevent putting down 4 or 5 coats of some of the lighter colors?
Definitely. I mean, there's definitely some tricks you want to do. I mean, is with yellow, lighter colors, you know, oranges, they tend to take more coats to cover, especially with water-based paints. A couple tricks there, just to recap, is using a light gray paint, a beige paint. If you're using white, another trick is in that first coat of white, add a little gray to that white, and that'll help minimize the amount of coats you got to put down, which is going to be helpful in the end as well.
Yeah, super helpful, because the more coats we put down, the thicker that is, the more likely we're to pull some of that paint away from places we don't want to as well. Bobby, how about on putting our second stencil down? What are some of the things we learned?
So I like to show, you know, through my mistakes of pulling registration marks, and we worked through. We had the 3 of them on there, so it worked out well. But I think a big thing would be is working in teams. You know, I mean, maybe work with a smaller stencil like this, and then learn. Because I mean, on a job site where you get some of those bigger center logos, I mean, they could be, you know, 20 by 20, so they're huge. So, you know, learn on maybe one of these smaller ones. And once you do a couple of them, they're actually really simple to do. It's just kind of taking your time and working with somebody else.
And that's a good point, Bobby. I mean, practice really with a lot of these techniques is going to make you, you know, get closer to perfection. I mean, you'll never really have perfect. It's hard to achieve. You're going to always have these little issues that pop up. The more you practice, the more familiar you get with these things, the better your end result is going to become.
And like you said, stuff is going to happen on the job site. So, right, I've heard this said so many times that, you know, the 2 most used phrases in a wood floor guy's vocabulary is "oops," and "I can fix that," right? So when we pulled this, the first stencil, you know, we pulled some of the blue paint away. We weren't sure how that was going to play into the second stencil, and then actually pull the corner away, pulled some more. But we said, hey, let's see how the second stencil lays out. Let's see what's going to cover, what's not. And I think that's just one of the things you talk through then as you're going through this is, hey, here's something that happened. Do we fix it now? Can we do something now to set us up for later to make that repair easier? Because we know we're going to have to come back to it sooner or later, but sometimes it's just a discussion of, do we touch it now or do we wait and touch it later? Sometimes if by touching something now, we're going to make more of an issue for ourselves than just waiting, seeing how the final product comes out, and then going back and doing the final touch-ups. How about on this one, especially with, I think, following, you know, feathering out the paint and following your pattern?
Yeah, a couple different things. I mean, this one's a unique one because we added stain and paint together. I mean, making sure your stains dry is always going to be important here. And once you get your stencil down, you know, again, following the design, the path of the design. You don't want to just roll on and call it good. You know, take the time. Take the patience to just really go with the flow of that design, smooth it out, back brush if you need to, because that's going to save you a lot of time, especially when you start pulling it and you have your end result. So that's a good thing to always keep in mind.
And then as we pointed out, you might not see it from this shot, but our anchor pattern that Bobby and Phil finished out. Again, I think Phil made a great point in that, you know, your stencil is only your starting point. Just use it as your guideline. Even if it comes to you or you first see it as a two-color design, right? It's wide open. Again, use your imagination, use some artistry, find out what colors your customer likes or what they might be thinking, and you can work those into any design. All right, we want to thank you all for joining in again for part 2, and looking forward to doing the full unveils for you on part 3. You can catch more of our training videos on our Bona Professional YouTube channel. Make sure you listen to On the Floor podcasts with Wayne and Rob, anywhere that you download your favorite podcasts. And then always feel free to call our sport floor specialists like Phil, your territory managers out with Bona, or also, you know, any of our tech and training guys, as well as the e-learning team. We're all here to help you be more successful with Bona products. You can always call our main line tech support at 800-872-5515. But thanks for your time, thanks for your interest, and thanks for improving your business with Bona products.